Serious, what do you think is the creepiest, most disturbing unsolved mystery ever? The Ibadan Forest of Horror in Nigeria. A local taxi driver goes missing, and his friends create a makeshift search party and investigate a forest. Instead of finding their friend, they find an abandoned school or factory that have the remnants of a hellish torture, murder, ritual killing, and human trafficking. 8 survivors were rescued. Numerous body parts, rotting corpses, and personal artifacts were found. The perpetrators were never found, although local politicians and ritualists were suspects. Whilst this discovery is disturbing, the mystery for me is that the original taxi driver still hasn't been found. I remember watching the Unsolved Mysteries episode about a person in 1977 who would send creepy, anonymous letters to random folks in a small town. Actually threatening ones too. The sender started by mailing up a woman and telling her, if I remember right, that they knew she was cheating on her husband with a superintendent, something she vehemently denied. Then they threatened her husband by saying he'd be in danger if he did not stop the affair. The couple decided to take it upon themselves to hunt the sender down. That ended with the husband dead in his crashed pickup truck. The sender kicked the wife while she was down by leaving threatening signs along her bus route, at least one of which had an actual booby trap on it. They found and arrested a suspect, but it's still unknown today if he's the actual sender. He denies it. The idea that somebody has been quietly studying your life just so they could begin to anonymously blackmail you or make up a rumor to blackmail you with is pretty damn scary. Addendum. In 2021, a forensics professional claimed that the police were right all along and the suspect who was released by then was the sender. But the massive hole in her claim is how he was still able to write letters during his time in prison. The case of the Isdal woman. The dead and burned body of a woman was found in a valley called Isdal near Bergen, Norway, in 1970. She also had an unholy amount of sleeping pills in her stomach. Many people can remember seeing her before. She was reportedly really noticeable and showed strange behavior. She was seen talking to strangers in her room, physically attracted different room numbers to the hotel rooms she stayed, and much more weird stuff. All labels in her clothes were cut off, and she owned several passports. She claimed to be Belgian most of the time. She was reportedly heard speaking German. Theories range from her being a luxury prostitute to her being deeply involved in Cold War espionage. The case of the Jennifer Fairgate, which is not her real name. The body of a woman was found in the Oslo Plaza Hotel in Oslo, Norway, in 1995. On the first glance, it looked like she committed suicide with a handgun, but many things point to her being not killing herself, like the strange way the gun was held in her hand and the fact that there was no blood on the hand she had the gun in, even though blood was found all around the room. She was seen talking to an unidentified man who visited her hotel room. All labels in her clothes were cut off. What's strange about her luggage that was found in the room is that she had any underwear with her, even though she had lots of dresses and pair stockings with her. She claimed to be Belgian and gave an address in Belgium when she checked in. The address doesn't exist. She was reportedly speaking German when checking in. Theories range from her being a luxury prostitute to her being involved in espionage. I find it strange how close those two cases are in many aspects. David Glenn Lewis went missing from Amarillo, Texas on Super Bowl Sunday in 1993. He was an attorney and former judge. His wife and daughter were out of town for the weekend shopping. He stayed back. They got back and the VCR was set to record the game. He had a sandwich made in the fridge, and his wedding ring was next to the sink where he left it when he washed his hands. So they figured out he was there before the game started, as they had to manually set the VCR. Over a decade later, in 2004, a John Doe was connected to him, all the way in Washington state. The circumstances of the then Doe's death: February 1st, 1993, Monday, one day after Lewis was assumed to be home last. A man was walking along Washington 24 at approximately 10:30 p.m. at night. He was fatally struck by a vehicle which fled the scene. He had no ID on him and was wearing what was described as Army surplus clothing. A cold case detective was able to connect it to Lewis in 2004 and give closure to his family. There are so many other details. He told his wife he was in danger but wouldn't explain. Weird tickets were purchased, money was deposited, his car was found with his ID, wallet, etc. under the floor mats. This is the one I cannot shake from my mind. This is a pretty good short read, but I know there's some great write-ups here on Reddit too. David Glenn Lewis. I know it's basic, but Black Dahlia is that one case that gives me the creeps for everyone who doesn't know, which I think the majority knows of this case. Elizabeth Short, aka the Black Dahlia, was found cut in half in Los Angeles, California in 1947. Most of her blood was drained out of her body. The woman who found her body thought she was a mannequin. That's how pale she was. She was cut with surgical precision, no organs harmed. Her face was also cut from mouth to ears, making a permanent creepy smile on her face. No blood on the ground, so the body was defiantly moved to the place it was found at. After she was found, I think 9 to 10 days after, an envelope was sent to the examiner with cut and pasted letters saying something in the lines of, "Here is Dahlia's belongings." The envelope contained Elizabeth's security card, birth certificate, photographs, etc., all cleaned with gasoline to remove fingerprints. I think in the March of the same year, the murderer committed suicide, leaving a note confessing to the murder and saying stuff like, "I have waited for the police to come find me. I'm too much of a coward to come turn myself in. This is the best way out for me." His clothes were found, and this note probably had fingerprints on it, yet no one could identify the killer, and the killer is still unidentified to this day. This case always brings me the chills because he has to be a trained professional to make those cuts, and he has to be so sick to even think about doing that. He said he killed himself, but can we be even sure? No body was found. I just read about the Nanjing mutilation case. On the evening of January 10th, 1996, Diao Aiqing left her Nanjing University's dormitory, although she had every sign of coming back later. She didn't come back. Her body, which was chopped, dismembered into over 2,000 pieces, came back instead. They were packed into bags and strewn all over the Nanjing University perimeters, found in the days during January 19th to 23rd, 1996, and another part of Nanjing near the municipal government office. Up until today, rumors and theories abound about when she died, where she died, how she died, and the murderer's background and identity, and how she met him. There were unconfirmed reports of someone being in custody numerous times, but no charge could be brought. And the creepiest thing is, who the hell can dismember a person into 2,000 plus pieces and still eat and sleep with the corpse for almost 10 days? Who can evade the police for over 20 years? And Afik, she, never killed again, or at least no other similar murders ever popped up. Unfortunately, there's not much on the case of Eddie Castor, 15, Rachel Castor, 18, and Veronica Flores. 16 Rachel was in my math and gym class at the time. She was a casual acquaintance, shared a joint on the field and off campus at lunch, along with other stoner kids. There's a FB page also. On April 13th, 1984, the Castor's father dropped the 3 children off that night at a golf and stuff in Norwalk border of Downey in LA country, with strict orders to be picked up at a prearranged time. Eddie Castor, Rachel Castor, and Veronica Flores, a fellow friend of them, were all prepared for a night of fun. Unfortunately, they were later found dead at around 10 p.m. Eddie was found with a slashed throat on the sidewalk. It was shown that he crawled over the riverbank and passed out on the riverbed. Both Veronica and Rachel were both found at the riverbank of the San Gabriel River, which is right behind the golf and stuff. Veronica had a stab in the back, and Rachel had multiple slashes over her body. Veronica was 4.5 months pregnant. had a learning disability, and was about to get married to her boyfriend and move to a nearby apartment. After being annoyed of dealing with a group of students who seemed intent on making her miserable, she transferred from Southgate High School to Odyssey. She was about to get married to her boyfriend and move to a nearby apartment. Eddie and Rachel were the fourth and fifth children of 6 in the family. They were very bright and well loved by friends and community. Detectives looked into the case and were amazed. Many theories were floating around, including one that believed that a cult killed them, since it was Friday the 13th and pentagrams were painted and frogs were impaled on a fence nearby. It is unknown why exactly they were targeted for murder. Many people believe that the trio was killed due to bullying, since Veronica was harassed many times during her school time. However, the river area was a relatively crime-free zone. Richard Ramirez was known to be around this time frame. He attacked or killed 25 people from March to August. In 2009, detectives linked Ramirez to the killing of Mei Leung in San Francisco on April 10, 1984, which was exactly 3 days before the Castor Flores killings. Ramirez was known to travel all over the state looking for people to kill. Veronica's family wondered if it was Richard Ramirez who killed them. Detectives never really thought of the idea, but they have never carefully checked to see if Ramirez was involved. Detectives took another look at the case in 2009. They collected DNA from evidence, which they had believed belonged to someone other than the 3 teenagers. They ran the DNA through a database of criminals, but they got no hits, meaning the samples didn't correspond to any criminals from whom DNA had been collected. So I read this and other stories of women disappearing on cruise ships not long before I went on my 10th cruise. The second to last night, we open a bottle of champagne in our room. We leave for 10 minutes to visit a friend's cabin about 2 doors down while staff services our room. We come back to the room and I have a single glass of champagne. I have a very high tolerance for alcohol and have never, not once, become drunk after just 1 glass of anything, ever. After drinking 1 glass, we head to dinner. While at dinner, I start to feel woozy, queasy, and a little dizzy. I get up and excuse myself to head to the restroom when I suddenly remembered that all of the missing girls' friends and families stated they said they felt like I did and either left to go to the bathroom or to their rooms alone. I asked my husband to please accompany me as I was scared. He did, but he decided to use the restroom as well, and when I came out, I was alone and leaned up against the side of the wall waiting for him. 3 male cruise employees had been hanging around the restrooms and immediately tried to get me to let them help me back to my room. I repeatedly said I was fine where I was, and I thanked them. One man actually grabbed my arm and said he would take me back to my room and tried to forcibly move me. I was wobbly and wearing heels, so I just sat down, looked up at him, and yelled, "No!" My husband heard me yell and came running out of the restroom asking them what in the hell they were doing. The men changed from predators to pretending they were trying to help me. My husband took me back to our room, where I apparently told him the entire story, which I don't remember because I have no memory for about 8 hours. I have been roofied before, and I believe I was roofied on the ship when a member of staff spiked the champagne in our room. My husband doesn't drink anymore, so he didn't have any. We reported the incident, but to my knowledge, nothing came of it. I don't share this story very often, but I believe I was targeted, and if I hadn't been awake enough to yell no and had my husband with me, I would have ended up trafficked or dead. Unsurprisingly, this experience soured me on cruises. The Hinterkaifeck murders. A farmer in Germany back in the 1920s had noticed mysterious footprints in the snow around his house. There was also strange stuff happening around the farm. Footsteps in the attic, a newspaper that no one in the family had bought, and eventually, the house keys disappeared. What makes it stranger is that the housekeeper had left a few months prior, swearing up and down that the farm was haunted. The family suddenly went unseen for a couple of days. Their neighbors went to check on them, only to find the entire family, as well as their newly hired housekeeper, had been murdered. Most of the family had been lead into the barn one by one and slaughtered with what's believed to have been a pickaxe. The maid and their youngest son were killed in their beds. The worst part is that the youngest daughter lived for a few hours after the attack. She spent the last few hours of her life lying next to her dead family in the hay of the barn and had torn chunks of her own hair out in that time. Despite the best efforts of the police, they never found out who murdered the family. Whoever it was stayed in the house after the murders. The neighbors saw smoke coming from the chimney, and some of the food had been eaten. Still, 90-something years after the murders, no one really knows who did it. In the 1970s in Galway, Ireland, local kids would spook each other out by peeking at the bones in a secret chamber in Field. Nobody really believed they were bones, except one woman, Catherine Corliss, a local historian who, probably deducing that if the Catholic Church, who owned the land, was involved, something sketch AF was afoot. It took years, but eventually, in 2017 I think, she managed to get the site partially excavated. The bones of around 800 babies and children were been found. Who had been chucking baby bodies into this chamber? Well, Catholic nuns, of course. When? The Dark Ages? No, the 1950s-ish. Maybe you till the 1970s. Why? Why the F were nuns throwing baby bodies into septic tanks? Why not? The babies were born to unmarried mothers, so, those dastardly teeny babies, born to women who were basically children themselves, were full of sin. So the baby bodies, 800 remember, were put there by nuns from the nearby Mother and Babies Home, a place where unmarried pregnant women were sent, mostly in the 1950s, to work as slaves, receive little to no medical treatment for their pregnancies and births, and, if they were lucky, have their babies snatched from them and sold to Catholic parents in America or wherever. The less lucky babies and children died, or were killed, and thrown into a septic tank. These were their remains. God's work. And, okay, this is obviously solved, right? People went to prison, amends were made, etc., right? Nope. No one has ever been charged. No one has taken any real responsibility. And the Catholic Church is currently fighting very hard to have a place in the board of a national maternity hospital being built in Ireland. And they'll get it. Because, why shouldn't we trust them? Jonathan Luna. That one still stays with me. He was a lawyer from Baltimore who mysteriously left his office one night, leaving his glasses, which he needed to drive, and his cell phone on his desk. He then mysteriously drove through the late night and early morning hours through Delaware and New Jersey to a location in Pennsylvania, which was not the most direct route, where he was found dead in a creek with his car running and blood inside. On the drive to Pennsylvania, he used Easy Pass for the first few tolls, then switched to paying cash after. There are many interesting theories, but it's never been solved. 1. Homicide related to his job as an attorney. He did have a recent, interesting case, as I recall reading somewhere as well, which might support this theory. His death was ruled a homicide by Lancaster County, Pennsylvania officials. The official cause of death was drowning after suffering stab wounds. Interestingly, a pool of blood in the back of the car supports this theory, since this would suggest he was back there and someone else was driving. 2. Suicide related to a possible but never proven theory that he stole money from a bank robbery case he worked on, or a possible guilt over an extramarital affair, as he was registered on an internet dating site. He is also said to have had over $25,000 in debt. Definitely not the creepiest ever, but thought I'd mention the Bloody Benders. They were a family of serial killers near my hometown in the 1870s. They ran a small general store, restaurant, motel on a popular trail. The sleeping quarters were separated from the dining area by a large wagon tarp. They would seat dinner guests with their backs to the tarp. A man would hide behind the tarp and could see the silhouette of the guest. He'd bash them in the skull with a hammer, and the body would fall into the cellar via a trap door. The motive was robbery. Although the reports of missing travelers on the trail were mounting and suspicion was zeroing in on their area, they got away with it for quite some time. They would target single men traveling alone. Their big mistake came when they killed a prominent local doctor whose brothers were a state senator and an army colonel. The army colonel relentlessly searched for his brother and interviewed the neighbors who indicated the Benders were creepy and potentially criminal. Very soon after that, their business was found abandoned. The neighbors, led by a local sheriff's detective, uncovered dozens of graves on the property, including that of a man and small girl buried in a single grave. Evidence indicated the child was buried alive. Detectives pursued the family to a criminals colony in western Texas, but couldn't pursue them any further. Later, 2 women matching the description of 2 women of the family were arrested in another state and brought back for trial. They were positively identified by several neighbors. Their lawyer fabricated evidence providing them with an alibi, which the county accepted, not wanting the expense of a trial, and they were released. An alternate theory, told by my great-great-great-grandfather, who was one of the neighbors, is that the neighbors formed a posse and hunted them down, finding them camping next to a river in the next county, and lynched them. The posse were sworn to secrecy at least until their leader died. The leader was the father of the sheriff's detective.